or a half an hour, and hopefully we can give some folks some good information. It looks like we're live now. Sure. So, hey, everybody, I don't know how many people are listening. This is our first time doing a Facebook Live. Obviously, my name's Andy Doutrick. You can see that in the screen. And I'm with my friend Don Mull, who is also a licensed loan originator with Centennial Lending Group. Don and I met about a year ago down in Florida at an awards banquet. And Don's a great guy. Introduced me to something called divorce mortgage guidance, which I went ahead and took advantage of last year and went and got my designation. And so we're hoping to share some information with whoever's watching tonight, whether you're someone that's going through a divorce, considering a divorce. You could be a paralegal, you could be a lawyer, but we're hopefully going to spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes talking about what it is we do, maybe field some questions, and then get out of here. So just a real quick background, Don, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the brains behind this outfit is an attorney named Professor Kelly Murray. And she designed this course to help folks like us be able to educate attorneys, paralegals, and divorcing homeowners on how best to handle secured house debt. Kelly Murray's got 2 law degrees. Don't ask me why you would want to put yourself through that whole process twice. But she's actually got 2 law degrees, right? Harvard and Stanford?
Well, she went to Stanford undergrad and Harvard Law, and she's a professor at law at Vanderbilt. And what the whole genesis of it is, she's actually the leading researcher on divorce and elder real estate, and that's her whole mission. Is actually she's the there's a national housing project on housing and financial justice, and she's the lead investigator. But she gives a lot of what in the legal community, continuing legal ed or CLEs, and she's done those she's given for over 2,000 judges, mediators, and family attorneys. And it was back in 2008 when she started getting questions from especially family lawyers saying, hey, listen, you've done a great job of showing us all these cases, because divorce is state by state. But what can, has, and will go wrong with the house in divorce? And, who do we work with on the real estate side that specializes in this? And Professor Murray didn't know. She said, shame on me, I should have. She did a little research thinking that she'd at least find a seminar, and there was nothing. So that's when the light bulb went off and said, look, there's a real need in the legal community for lending officers and the real estate community to specialize and understand exactly what is going on and how we can be of value to not only attorneys and mediators, but also divorcing spouses.
A lot of people take what we do for granted under normal circumstances when we're dealing with first-time home buyers, or we're dealing with people that are in the middle of a cash-out refinance for a renovation. But where I really see value to what it is that folks like you and I do is navigating these minefields and all these loopholes that exist when you've got an exact opposite situation that you had where, maybe 5 years ago, you had these 2 folks that were so madly in love and were planning their life together and were in agreement with everything that was going to happen. And they bought a house and they cooperated. Mm-hmm. And now you've got those same 2 people where their lives have taken a turn and they're actually divorcing and maybe not cooperating or not able to see things clearly. And that's where this divorce mortgage guidance comes in, and our ability to educate, the attorneys and the paralegals and most importantly, the divorcing homeowners.
You're absolutely right. And it's just like, much like the family lawyers, and Annie, I believe I'm a divorce survivor. I believe you are as well, right? So when I was going through my divorce, I have many friends who are attorneys. One's a very successful patent attorney. One's a very successful commercial litigator. One's a insurance defense. Could they have done my divorce? Technically, I guess, yes, had they done some research. But they said, look, we're not well versed in divorce law, so you need to speak to a divorce attorney. So similar to that, there's loan officers that people know loan officers, but do you know one that specializes in divorce mortgage guidance? And that really is the value that we bring, because it's a highly charged situation. And so what we're trying to do from a consumer protection standpoint is try to neutralize the emotions. And I understand if represented many where, if we're representing the wife, spouse, and she wants to keep the house, we call that the house spouse.
Right.
The spouse moving out is the out spouse. But if we're representing the wife, house spouse, and she says, look, my number one goal is to keep this house. And I understand it. There's an emotional attachment if children and their friends in the neighborhood, the schools, et cetera. I understand. But let's try to remove ourselves from that emotion for a minute, because this is one of the largest financial decisions you're going to make. So let's try to reduce those emotions so we can make an informed financial decision regarding keeping this house. Because I've been there where they'll say, look, I never should have kept this house.
Yeah.
So because there's a lot of holding costs associated with it. So where we come in, not only on the divorce mortgage guidance, but we take what's called an enhanced house due diligence. And in doing so, we assemble a team of professionals that each have their own discipline. And Andy, you and I will come in and we'll provide the divorce mortgage guidance and what needs to be done and what pitfalls we know have happened to avoid. But then we take a look at things such as the title of the house, because we know that there can be pitfalls and horror stories with title. We look at the condition, because we know that many times everyone's saying, well, we're just going to get the house appraised and then that'll be it. Well, we can show you some gaps in that appraisal that cause gaps in your what's called the case file. And in doing so, you kind of come into that mediation table blind and with an incomplete case file without the information that you need. So it's not just some sort of a pre-qualification conveyor belt that we're doing to say, hey, listen, if you want to keep the house, yeah, you can keep it. That's part of it.
Right.
So there's so much more.
So we want to touch on a couple things tonight, and in the short time we have, hopefully we're giving people things to think about and maybe ways that we might be able to help them. And you had talked about gaps in the case file as it relates to title and as it relates to the appraisal. But I want to back up a second and talk about one of the things that we are really trying to help folks with as they're going through this process, regardless of the outcome, is trying to help them protect their credit score and preserve their ability to purchase a home in the future, whether that's 12 months down the road or 3 years down the road when the dust is settled and the divorce is complete, and taking a good look at their position with that property at the moment and trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to make sure that the credit score that you have right now is going to be intact 12 months from now? And what are we going to do to make sure that whether you keep this house or not, you have the ability to buy another home in a year? So in addition to gaps in the case file, which is really sexy language that attorneys like to hear because they don't run into people like us often that know what a gap in a case file is. But also talking to their clients and saying, hey, listen, like you had said earlier, Don, it's an emotionally charged event in your life. And sometimes your wants and your needs are two different things. But how are we going to make sure that regardless of what happens, we're adding value to our relationship, regardless of the immediate outcome with this particular home?
Well, we really look at it as there's two ways or two situations, really, if we're going to generalize. First of all, it's, the house is sold or the house is kept. And where the house is kept, typically what we'll see is, again, let's just say that we're representing the wife and she wants to keep the house. So she's going to be the house spouse. Typically what's happening is she's agreeing to, there's going to be what's called a hold harmless. And then Professor Murray said, she calls it the 4 H's. A hold harmless hardly helps unless there's contingencies. And even when there's contingencies, we can see where people are gaming the contingencies. Let me give an example. So there was a case here in Florida where she was the house spouse and he was the out spouse. And one of the contingencies was that she could not be more than 30 days late with the mortgage payment. Well, she was 30 days late. She just wasn't more than 30 days late. And the problem there is there's a FICO study that was done actually at Vanderbilt University. And they found that, the FICO score for those that aren't in our world, but it's your credit score. And it goes from 350 to 850 being the highest and the best. So in the study said, we had a client who was a FICO score of 780 and they were just 30 days late, that credit score went from 780, it lost 100 points down to 670 to 690. Here's the most detrimental thing though. It takes on average 3 years to get back to where that borrower was. And what that impact is that it's not just a mortgage, any kind of secured financing, you're going to get a car, credit card, all your cost of borrowing just went up. So, in fact, there was an attorney that came to me. There had already been a final judgment. She came to me and she said, I'm representing now, he's the out spouse. And they signed the marital settlement agreement, or the MSA. They signed it, and it stated that she had to refinance the house. And so they signed it. Well, she never bothered, and no one bothered to say, does she qualify for a recognized loan program? Well, here we are now 2 years later. She's not been making her payments. And now his credit score is done. He may never be homeownership eligible again. And the reason is because, going back to that marital settlement agreement, there wasn't enough teeth in those contingencies. So that's where we come in. We say, listen, we've seen this. We want to tighten those up to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. Because our whole goal is, like you said, Andy, it's homeownership eligibility, because we know that credit can get damaged severely. Now, sometimes payments can't be made. We get it. But sometimes it's for other reasons.
Right.
And that's why we want to make sure that they're protected.
And it makes sense to do things in a logical order. A lot of times, our phone will ring and it'll be in a panic from the house spouse who's saying, I've got 60 days to refinance this house, or my ex-husband's going to make me sell it. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, they've been divorced for 2 years, or they've been separated for 18 months. And there either hasn't been a property settlement agreement, or that property settlement agreement was put in place, and now the house spouse is in jeopardy of being in contempt. But what becomes very powerful, and back to what you had mentioned earlier about gaps in the case file, is when attorneys order appraisals, they order appraisals to determine value, to divide equity and mm-hmm. assets. Mm-hmm. What they're not taking into consideration is the condition of that home, which might affect that borrower's ability to obtain a certain type of financing. Right. When that borrower applies for a loan with us, not only are we qualifying the borrower, we're qualifying the property, and we're also ordering title to make sure that there's no other liens on that property that are going to affect the payoff. Right. So if we're able to jump in at the very beginning of this as a partner with the attorney, and act as an advocate for the borrower, we can a lot of times be prepared to go into that property settlement agreement and say to the master, or to say to the judge, Your Honor, we're prepared to purchase this home, and we can do it within the next 45 days.
Well, you nailed it. Our value is pre-mediation and being part of that discovery process.
Right.
It must have been about 6 months ago, an attorney came to me and said, similar situation. I'm now representing the wife, out spouse. He's in the house. She's been in part of that marital settlement agreement was, hey, he's going to make those payments and supposed to refinance. Well, he didn't. And so the attorney said, well, what can we do? I said, well, unfortunately, there's not a lot. Our value is pre-mediation. I said, but here's my question. Has he been making the payments? And she said, no, he hasn't. I said, well, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but your client may not have any credit left. So again, that's where it's key, is because property settlement is permanent. And many times those mistakes cannot be fixed. If they can, it's very expensive, but most times they can't. Right. That's why we say, hey, listen, get us on the front end, because these these pitfalls that we know have seen, we make sure that we avoid them.
Yeah. Yeah. And more often than not, we're able to educate either the house spouse or the out spouse in terms of things that they may not have known. I mean, it's happened to me more times than it hasn't, where you take a house spouse who maybe is making less than the out spouse, right? So let's say the wife is staying and the husband left, and typically they make more, or she was part-time, or didn't work and just started working when things got rocky so she could have her own bank account. And they come to us and they go, I don't really think I can do this. And we go, well, hold on, let's see if we can get you qualified. And we hand them a pre-approval. subject to an appraisal and title work. And now they go to their attorney and say, we've met with a loan originator who said, I'm able to do this on my own. We just need to finalize alimony and child support so that I can verify my income. And then that seems to be where the games start to get played between the divorcing spouses and sometimes to an extent the attorneys, where they start to stall to try to make it almost impossible for that person to stay in the home. I don't know if you see that, but I do.
Well, something else, it just reminded me of a case from 3 weeks ago, and it revolves around the topic of unintended consequences. And this case was where we're representing the house spouse, and I sat in consultation with her, and her number one goal is to keep that marital home. Then opposing counsel came and said, hey, listen, in lieu of alimony, how about we just do, it's called an alimony buyout, lump sum. And I understand, I'm not saying an alimony buyout is good or bad. I understand the certainty of it. It's a set amount. She's taking less based on the present value of money, but it's not based on her life or his life. Here was the problem, was that the proposed amount, and she had gone to her financial advisor saying, what do you think? Well, the financial advisor said, take the lump sum and you can do monthly withdrawals, pay it. Well, he was partially correct. That is possible. It's something that we call asset depletion underwriting. And so unfortunately, thank God the attorney came to me and said, what do you think of this? And I said, well, you're about in this case, they're about $125,000 short. So has she signed that marital settlement agreement saying, okay, this sounds good. Financial advisor said it sounds good, and then went to refinance, she would have been denied. She would have been taking a huge pay cut, but from an underwriting standpoint. Right. Yeah. Right. So, and it's not just, I keep talking about the recipient of alimony. Now, if you can if you're financially, able to refinance on your own, then absolutely. But especially if there's going to be some sort of support, alimony, child support, that's going to be used as income, you want to make sure that the language in the marital settlement agreement is in such a way that it fosters successful home ownership eligibility. Let me give you an example. So you mentioned 6 months. So Andy, in our world, our judge and jury is the underwriter. So if we're going to be going to the underwriter and saying, hey, listen, we want our client to keep this marital home, the underwriter is going to say, look, I need, now depending on the loan program, on average, it's 6 months. 6 months of on-time payments in full before that looks like income in my eyes. Right. So if I see an MSA presented that says you got to refinance in 6 months, I say, well, it's not going to work. So it's not so much, I'm not talking about a higher alimony award. I'm talking more about structuring it so that maybe it's less over a longer period of time. I would say, hey, listen, let's at least 7 months, because that's 6 months of on-time payments at the time of application. So she may need 7 months to get that application even started. So the other thing is, on the back end, that same underwriter is going to say, okay, now I need to see 3 years of continuous of payments. Right. Okay, well, if that 3 years started before the loan application, it's not going to work. It's 3 years from the date of the application, right? Right. That's why it's so critical to deal with somebody who specializes in this to make sure that the common pitfalls are avoided. And just like when we talk to, borrowers that, the first word out of their mouth is, what's my interest rate? Or how much am I qualified for? Your mortgage is very much like a fingerprint, and a divorce is even more complicated because you're untying all of these knots that affect each other. And like you had said about asset depletion, income, and trying to figure out alimony and when that's going to start and how long it's going to work. These are things that, just like we're not trained to give out legal advice or financial advice in terms of investing, these other professionals don't have the same training that we do, which is why it's important for, at the very least, us to be involved with the divorcing spouses, because they can at least act on our behalf as a conduit to their attorney and say, I'm going to need you to speak with my RCSD to make sure that we're putting this together right. And I'm going to be able to buy another home so that I can keep my kids in the school district that we want to be in, or that I know that when this divorce is over, I'm going to be able to buy another home in 12 months because my credit's going to be okay. Well, and I mentioned the financial advisor, we work hand in hand with the other people that are involved in this equation, CPAs and the financial advisor, they're concerned about something called the marital balance sheet. Now, and there can be gaps if they're just saying everything, okay, we got the appraisal, it said the house is worth $300,000. And we're just selling, and they're just going to sell the house and they're just going to split the proceeds. Okay, well, here's the problems that we've seen pop up there, where they say, okay, the marital balance sheet is $300,000 with the house. They're going to split it $150,000 each. Okay, well, what's missing from that equation? What about liens? Liens happen. There was a case where a husband and wife, they got divorced. He decided to keep the house. She moved out. And he said he signed the marital settlement agreement, which is permanent and binding, and says, I'll refinance it. After that was signed, he went to refinance. It was during the refinance process that it was uncovered that during the marriage, unbeknownst to him, she had accumulated a $217,600 tax liability, which resulted in a lien being placed on the house. Now, while he passed, the house failed because no title agent would touch it, right, with that lien. And it's not, some states are homestead. It's not a get out of lien free card. They still have to be accounted for. So now that equity is legally reduced. And then also about damages. This one attorney said, Don, because part of our due diligence process is with the inspection, and some deny it, say, no, I don't need it. I know the house. Okay. Well, there was a case where an attorney came to me and said, hey, listen, what you just brought up and reinforces a great point. I knew someone socially, this woman, so I represented her more of kind of a pro bono. And we signed the marital settlement agreement, said the house is worth X. Well, after the final judgment, it was uncovered. She noticed some warping behind the wall. And it turned out that for a long period of time, there was a slow perpetual leak during the marriage that now resulted in about a $20,000 repair. She had to rip out the wall. Now, that should have been addressed pre-mediation, saying, hey, listen, that house isn't worth what the appraisal says, because people don't understand the appraisal is designed for one thing and one thing only. That's just to predict loan performance. That's for us. Especially now, Andy, you've seen how many appraisal waivers have you seen?
Right.
So damage to the house will reduce the equity and the value of the house. So again, that goes into the whole due diligence process and the team that we've assembled. So,
and to your point regarding the condition of the property and us making sure that the appraisal is going to be sufficient to loan the amount of money that we need to loan. And you had talked about the gal that had created that $217,000 tax lien. The other thing that Professor Murray talked about, and I actually just ran into last month for the first time, and thankfully it was a happy ending, was we had a divorcing couple who, unbeknownst to the house spouse, had forgotten that they had taken out a $30,000 line of credit with their bank 2 years prior to put some addition onto the home, which they had then paid off, and it was zeroed out, but never closed. And the husband had moved out and had put close to $3,000 on that line of credit for a security deposit on an apartment and some furniture. Now, we were lucky enough to catch that on her credit report, because when I pulled credit, I said, hey, there's a $3,000 balance on a line of credit. And she goes, that was paid off 2 years ago. And I said, well, paid off and closed are two different things. That line of credit is now open, and he has every right to use that. So we then reached out to her attorney, who reached out to his attorney, and the attorney was able to speak to him reasonably and say, stop using that. But had nobody said anything to him, he could have ran that thing up to $30,000, and she's in the process of refinancing, and now she's got problems.
Oh, I can think of two cases. One where the couple, similar to your situation, they had taken out a $50,000 home equity line of credit, or the HELOC, and used it responsibly. Now, she was the house spouse, he was the out spouse, divested the title, final judgment. 3 years later, she goes to sell the house. And unbeknownst to her, that whole time he had been secretly using it as an ATM to the tune of $50,000. So she was expecting $50,000 more at the closing table than what she had. So, and then this is where we see a lot of that, what we call the shenanigans. And it's typically right before a divorce milestone. So recently there was a case in Kentucky where 24 hours prior to mediation, he went and hijacked the HELOC to the tune of $75,000. So that's
isn't illegal.
It's not illegal. I mean, they're both, the bank doesn't care if you're married or divorced. You're both signing that document saying we're responsible for this payment. And speaking of title, there was a case up in Cape Canaveral where he moved out, and this is what he did. And the previous counsel, now this is the attorney I'm working with now, she was not involved in the original marital settlement agreement, but she kept the house, and then she was supposed to make the payments, and he divested a title. Now he's legally responsible to pay for a home that he doesn't even own.
Yeah.
So this is where, again, we see these shenanigans. We see the mistakes,
and it's so funny how that advice is sometimes given by people that should be protecting their clients, but it hasn't happened recently, but I've had people that have said, "Oh, we've just got divorced. I signed a quitclaim deed. I'm not responsible for the house anymore." Well, no, you don't own the house anymore, but if he defaults on that debt, it's going to show up on your credit report too.
Oh, you bring up a point that, hey, my attorney should know this. Well, I do work in Michigan and in Florida. I was just up in Michigan 2 weeks ago for the Michigan Family Law Institute, their annual conference. And there was probably about 3 judges that I was talking to, and I was walking them through what I do. And the one said, "Tom, when I got divorced, I didn't know any of this stuff." She said, when we have, in our courtroom, they come in and they don't have the information we need, so we could irritate it. We're not going to do the research. I had a mediator in Broward County, think Fort Lauderdale area. Is when we walked her through what we do. I say we, because again, we're a team. She said, "You know what? I wish I would have known you guys last week. I had to mediate a case, and they came to me and said, well," in quote, she said, "I'm not an underwriter. I'm not a mortgage broker. I don't know this." So they're not taught this in law school. So
right. And that we're not disparaging what they do for a living. It's just the truth that it's what we do it's not rocket science, but you certainly need to know the ins and the outs of how to underwrite a loan and the consequences of one thing versus another. And attorneys don't get paid to do that. They get paid to interpret the law and protect their clients in front of the judge.
Absolutely. And, we've talked a lot about, the house spouse and the recipient of alimony. And this equally goes for the outspouse and the payor of alimony. This is why, because going back to our judge and jury, the underwriter is going to say, okay, he or she is responsible to pay alimony. Depending on which lender it is, that underwriter, based on their risk tolerance, they're going to look at it one of 2 ways, either as recurring debt or a reduction in qualifying income.
Right.
You want to ideally reduction in qualifying income, because if it's one of the top reasons why mortgages are denied is because the debt to income ratio is too high. So if he agrees, let's say we're representing him and he's going to be the payor of alimony, he should know, he's going to want to buy a place of his own. He should know what it's going to take for him to qualify for a recognized loan program, because if the lender that he goes to views that as recurring debt and it affects his debt to income ratio, he could sign that marital settlement agreement. Now it's permanent, and he could say, and he goes to apply for a loan and he's denied. Wouldn't he want to know that prior to signing so he can negotiate? So
it's a very emotional process at the time, like you said at the beginning, and people aren't thinking clearly. You run into so many times where people are just running on pure emotion, and they need to stay in that home for the sake of their kids, or they don't have anywhere else to go. But at the end of the day, our job is to give them the right advice to make sure that when this whole thing is over, whether it goes quickly or it takes forever, that they're in as good, if not a better position than when they called us in the beginning. Which leads me, and we want to try to stick to a half an hour here, because I feel like you and I could rap about this forever. And maybe what we could do, if this is well received, maybe we could do another one. Maybe even bring another guest on and kind of rap about this. But it brings me to the last note that I made here, which is to explain what Ecoa is and how Ecoa actually works to the benefit of these house and out spouses. So Ecoa stands for Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And it says that lenders can't discriminate against a certain demographic of borrowers. And one of those borrowers is marital status. So if somebody comes to you for advice and they're going through a divorce, or we know that we may not be able to help them, we can't turn them away. We have to help them, and it's free. Yeah.
In fact, I got a call from an attorney, and she said, hey, she's representing the wife, house, spouse. And she said she's very aware and sensitive about my rate, right? So there's a retainer. It can only go so far. So when I spoke to, so she gave me her client's number. I called her client, and she said, well, I want to meet with you, but does she have to be in the room with us? Because that's going to cost me X amount an hour. I said, absolutely not. And that's the number one, I guess, aspect that my lawyer partners initially had to overcome. They said, well, wait, let me get this straight. You don't charge an hourly rate for what you do, because that's their business model. Our business model, and as you know, it's more of a volume. If we take 10 loan applications, you close 1, 2, or 3, you're doing great. And that's okay. But again, we're bound by that Ecoa that we can't charge for it. So that's why the value that we bring. And hey, listen, perfect example. I got a call from the attorney. She said she's representing the husband's, and he's the out spouse. The husband called me and said, do you mind calling my wife, because I want her to keep the house. The kids are there. And he said she seems to think that she's got to get a loan, and then the line of credit. And I told her that I don't think she has to, but she's not listening. I say, hey, listen, unfortunately, you've lost that right to tell her. I said, so I've been there. I get it. Yeah. So I could probably tell her the very exact same thing, and she'll listen to me, but not you, even though she's, she doesn't know me from Adam. Yeah. So I spoke with her, and she was emotionally charged. And it turned out that she's a nurse, and she qualified on her own to keep the house. And I said, hey, listen, this is a big decision. I don't want you to say yes or no right now. I want you to think about this. So, because there's a lot to it. And it was probably about 3 or 4 days later, she called. She says, I've been thinking about it. He and I have both been on this mortgage, and now it's just going to be me. And we've shared all the other expenses associated with the house. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and sell and maybe get something more right for me. And so I called the attorney. I said, look, she no longer wants to keep the house. She wants actually to sell the house. And the attorney's very business savvy. She goes, well, I'm sorry, you're not going to get the refinance. I said, no. I said, here's the point. I accomplished our whole mission, and that is to neutralize the emotion. She was so emotionally charged of keeping the house, when she was actually able to see the bigger picture, to take a few deep breaths and say, hey, listen, the financial part of it, just really, financial stress is not something that you want to be under. And that's what she would have felt. And it just wasn't worth it. So that goes back to the compassion and the consumer protection is our mission. And it's a great mission. I feel very strongly about it.
And at the end of the day, when you first become a fully commissioned loan officer, it's about getting paid. It's about closing those loans. It's about making sure that your volume stays up. And then as you progress and you've been doing the business long enough, and you start to realize that what we do and what RCSD and divorce mortgage guidance brings to our business, and especially you and me, Don, since we have the designation, is that it allows us to build those relationships. And the more relationships you can build, the more opportunities there are to help people. And when you help more people, the volume comes and the business is there. But you're right. There's something very satisfying about taking somebody that's in one of the worst places they've ever been in their life, emotionally and financially, and being able to kind of put that proverbial arm around them and say, let me show you how we can fix this. And so that's where Ecoa comes in. And that's where I'm an advocate of divorce mortgage guidance. The minute you told me about it, I signed up for it the next day. I took the course, got the designation, and I immediately went to work talking to the paralegals and looking for the attorneys and advertising on social media that it was something that I could do. And it's definitely a skill. I feel fortunate that I know you, because obviously you're very well versed in it, and you're like the king of case files. You probably rattle off 30 case files tonight. I'm more of a practical, hands-on, give me the file and I'll talk to you about it. but I appreciate you being on. And like I said, I feel like this was productive, and depending on the feedback we get from it, maybe we can do another one and bring somebody else on that might be able to add a different paint job so that it's not just the two of us talking.
Sure.
So, I mean, unless you have anything else to chat about, I haven't seen any questions, but honestly, I don't even know where I would look.
Yeah.
To see if there are any questions.
Again, I don't have the 8-year-old.
Yeah, it looks like we're just about done. We've been on for about 35 minutes. So unless you have anything else, I'd say we'll bag this thing and see what kind of feedback we get, and maybe we can do another one soon.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
Don, you're the man. I can't wait.
Andy.
Yeah, hopefully I'll see you again soon, shortly. I don't know where. Maybe
16th or 16th.
Oh, you'll be at the Christmas party.
Mm-hmm.
Good enough.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate it. Have a great night. It's always good seeing you.
Thanks for having me on, Andy. All right, buddy.
All right, take care.
All right, bye-bye.